I adjusted the stiff, square edges of my graduation cap with hands that trembled, not from fear, not from anxiety, but from the crushing weight of what this moment really meant. This wasn't just a day of ceremony and applause. This was the culmination of every lonely night spent studying under dim lights, every shift that ran until my body ached, every private humiliation endured behind silent, clenched teeth. This was my resurrection day, my quiet, burning revenge, the kind that would be witnessed by everyone who had once laughed at me when I dared to dream beyond the small life they'd tried to assign me. I stood tall, though inside every nerve felt stretched thin. The graduation hall buzzed with hundreds of families clapping, calling names, and crying happy tears. All around me were bright futures wrapped in polyester gowns, the air thick with the scent of flowers and perfume and pride. And somewhere, perched in the VIP section like an ice sculpture placed too close to the sun, sat Claire, my sister, flawless in appearance, terrifying in spirit, with a smirk stitched into her face like it was custom-made for moments exactly like this one. Her manicured fingers toyed lazily with the program as her sharp eyes found me in the crowd, and the tiny lift at the corner of her lips said it all. She was not here to celebrate me. She was here to mock me. I could almost hear the words before they left her lips, even though she hadn't spoken yet. That was the thing about Claire. She never needed to say anything for me to know exactly what she thought. She had perfected the art of undermining me with a glance, a lifted eyebrow, a turn of her perfectly curled hair. I wondered, just briefly, if she realized that today would not unfold the way she had imagined. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, calling the next group of graduates to line up near the stage. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, straightened my shoulders, and stepped forward, each movement feeling heavier than the last, as if gravity itself was testing my resolve one final time. All those nights folding clothes at the department store until midnight, those double shifts waiting tables and cleaning offices, those early morning classes where the coffee was barely enough to keep my eyelids open, they all funneled into this singular moment. A moment my family had spent years insisting would never come for someone like me. You have to understand, in our family, ambition wasn't just discouraged, it was ridiculed. Dreams were a punchline, and I was the biggest joke of them all. When I told them at 16 that I wanted to go to college, my mother laughed so hard she had to set down her wine glass. Claire had simply smiled, a soft, condescending thing, and said, "Aim lower, Steph. You're setting yourself up to fail." I made it, I thought, squeezing the diploma case tighter in my hand. I made it despite them. No, I made it because of them. The line moved forward. A few people ahead of me, someone's mother screamed with joy as her son's name was called. I wondered briefly what that must feel like, to have someone cheer for you so loudly that the whole world could hear it. When it was my turn, the speaker cleared his throat and called out, "Stephanie Allen, Bachelor of Business Administration, magna cum laude." I walked across that stage like the ground itself belonged to me. The overhead lights blinded me slightly, but I kept my gaze steady, locking onto the crowd as I heard a smattering of polite applause. It wasn't raucous or wild, but it didn't matter, it was mine. This applause was for me, and no one could ever take that away. And just when my hand brushed the diploma the dean was holding out to me, it happened. "Wow," Claire's voice rang out, slicing cleanly through the air like a shard of glass thrown into a lake. "It took you so long to finish high school." There was a ripple through the audience, the sound of awkward giggles, people pretending not to turn their heads. The dean froze for a split second, his mouth tightening at the corners. He turned his head slightly toward me, then to the section Claire occupied, his expression hardening. He leaned in, his voice low, a slight edge of amusement threading through it as he whispered in my ear, "She's not on the guest list, is she?" I almost choked on the laugh I swallowed. Instead, I let it pool quietly in my chest, releasing only a smile, a small, victorious, devastating smile. "No," I whispered back, tucking my diploma under my arm with careful deliberation. "She's not." For the first time in my life, someone with authority and power, someone not connected by blood and obligation, had looked at me and seen the truth. The truth that I did not deserve to be mocked. That maybe, just maybe, I had fought harder than anyone else in this room to be standing here at all. I descended the stage, my head held high, and the entire time, I could feel Claire's glare burning into my back. Let her burn, I thought. Let her watch. Today wasn't hers to ruin. The applause followed me as I stepped off the stage, the polite claps growing louder as the announcer's voice cut through the air again, inviting the next graduate forward, but I barely heard it. The blood in my veins roared like wildfire, and every step I took felt like I was walking through the smoke of every old humiliation, finally set ablaze. In the VIP section, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Claire, shifting uncomfortably, her once lazy posture now coiled tight like a wire stretched too far. I watched without breaking stride as she leaned over sharply, snatching the graduation program out of the bewildered hands of the older man sitting beside her, her smile faltering as she flipped through the thick, glossy pages with increasing urgency. The confident, cruel smirk she had worn so proudly when she hurled her insult at me was slipping, bleeding away like makeup under harsh rain, and in its place bloomed something I had never seen on her face before: real, genuine confusion mixed with a sour note of panic. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to savor every second of it, let it pour over me like the finest wine, but instead I kept my face blank, my hands steady, the diploma cradled against my chest like armor. Let her figure it out herself. Let her understand the hard way that today, this moment, was not the one she had written in her head, starring herself as the inevitable victor. Claire's perfectly manicured nails clawed through the program with frantic speed now, flipping pages so fast the paper made sharp, angry sounds under her touch. I imagined I could almost hear the whirring panic in her brain as she scanned the list of honorees, the list that had been kept confidential until just minutes before the ceremony began. There it was, printed in bold, unmistakable black ink, centered beautifully under the heading Academic Distinction and Special Honors. Stephanie Allen, Bachelor of Business Administration, magna cum laude, recipient of the Dean's Faculty Award for Excellence. The prestigious award was not some meaningless, dust-collecting plaque handed out like candy to anyone who showed up. No, it was reserved for a single student in the entire graduating class. One student whose perseverance, leadership, academic performance, and contribution to the university community was deemed exceptional by the faculty themselves. It was an honor so rare that only a handful had ever received it in the past decade. And that name, Claire's name, was nowhere to be found. Not in the general list, not among the honorees, not even in the footnotes where they occasionally mentioned special participation for students who had barely scraped by. The room around her seemed to shift subtly, as if the gravity had changed, pulling the reality sharper, closer, heavier onto her shoulders. She froze in place, her mouth parting slightly, the program slipping halfway from her fingers as her gaze locked onto the page like it might somehow change if she stared hard enough. She looked up then, her eyes finding mine across the crowded hall, and for the first time in my life, I saw her stripped bare. No armor of beauty, no shield of charm, no smug barrier of assumed superiority. Just a stunned, fragile, human girl realizing she was no longer the center of the story. The applause, still rolling across the auditorium in soft, steady waves, seemed to grow louder, wrapping around me like a second skin. It wasn't deafening or chaotic, it was respectful, genuine, the kind of applause given not out of obligation, but out of true acknowledgement. I dipped my chin slightly in Claire's direction, a gesture so small most would miss it, but she saw it. Oh, she definitely saw it. Her mouth snapped shut, her spine stiffening as though she'd just been physically struck. I didn't need to say a word. The weight of everything she had ever said to me, everything she had believed about herself and about me, collapsed silently between us like a crumbling monument. I returned to my seat with the others, the diploma heavy but comforting in my hands, the corners of the red leather digging softly into my palms. Around me, classmates beamed and wiped away tears, whispered excitedly to their families, posed for pictures that would live on mantles and in photo albums for generations. I sat still, breathing deep, feeling something inside me unwind slowly, a coil of tight, aching hunger I hadn't realized I had been carrying for years. It wasn't hunger for revenge, not exactly. It was hunger for acknowledgement. For proof. Proof that I was more than the labels my family had stapled to my back like cheap price tags in a bargain bin. When the final names were called and the ceremony officially ended, the crowd erupted into cheers, confetti cannons launching streams of silver and gold high into the air. The smell of powder and flowers mixed together in the hall, thick and almost dizzying, but I stayed rooted to my seat, letting the moment wash over me like rain after a long, blistering drought. Somewhere to my right, I heard Claire's sharp heels clicking against the polished floor as she made her way down the aisle, not with her usual predatory grace, but with the tight, jerky movements of someone who could not quite believe they were not being celebrated. I saw her approaching out of the corner of my eye, the program clutched so tightly in her hand now that the edges were bending under the pressure. She stopped a few feet away, standing awkwardly among the happy families and clusters of graduates posing for selfies. Her eyes flicked down to the diploma in my hands, then back up to my face, 1,000 words dying unsaid in the space between us. I waited, silent and patient. I wanted her to speak first, wanted her to carry the burden of opening whatever came next, but all she managed was a strained, bitter smile. "You got the award," she said, the words so stiff they barely made it past her lips. I nodded once, slow and deliberate, giving her no mercy, no reassurance, no soft place to land. "Yeah," I said, my voice strong, steady, unapologetically proud. "I did." Claire swallowed hard, her throat working visibly as she struggled to find something, anything, that would allow her to reclaim some semblance of control. "Well," she said finally, her voice wobbling slightly before she caught it, "I guess even you can get lucky sometimes." There it was, the last gasp of her old self, the claws flashing one last time before they were broken off for good. I stood then, towering a fraction taller than her in my graduation heels, and met her gaze head-on. "This wasn't luck," I said quietly, but with enough steel in my voice to cut clean through the noise of the crowd. "This was every night you laughed at me. This was every morning you told me I wasn't good enough. This was every second I spent alone while you were being worshipped for doing nothing." Claire blinked, stunned into silence, her carefully applied makeup seeming to crack at the edges as her face tightened. "And you know what?" I continued, my smile widening just a little. "I thank you for it." I brushed past her without waiting for a response, the diploma case pressed close to my side, the noise of celebration swelling louder behind me. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. For the first time in my life, I was done chasing it. Outside the auditorium, the late afternoon sun was already beginning its descent, casting long golden beams across the university courtyard. Families gathered in little circles, taking photos, hugging tightly, laughing freely. It was beautiful, the kind of messy, chaotic beauty I had always longed for but had stopped expecting from my own blood long ago. I walked slowly across the grass, savoring the feel of the diploma in my hands, the weight of it pulling me firmly into this new life I had earned. Not gifted, not stumbled into. Earned. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from my roommate, probably already planning the celebration she had insisted on throwing for me tonight. I smiled, slipping the phone back without reading it yet. I had time. I had all the time in the world now. Behind me, I knew Claire would eventually gather herself enough to leave the auditorium. She would walk back to her car, to her carefully curated life, and she would have to carry the knowledge that she hadn't just been eclipsed today, she had been forgotten. Today wasn't her stage. It never had been. It was mine. The applause had just begun to fade, a soft and settling wave washing over the hall as the last graduates returned to their seats, and I thought, for a moment, that the ceremony was over. I thought, foolishly, that my reckoning was complete, that the gods of hard work and silent endurance had finished writing their judgment on the pages of this afternoon. But fate, that cruel and beautiful playwright, had one more act to deliver, and I would be standing center stage when the final blow fell. The dean, a tall man with silver hair and sharp, hawk-like eyes, stepped forward to the microphone again, his voice steady but carrying a curious, almost electric undercurrent, as if even he could feel that the ground beneath us was about to shift again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone formal but edged with something warmer, something almost triumphant, "before we conclude today's commencement, we have one final honor to announce." A ripple moved through the room, the kind of ripple that comes when people instinctively sense something important is about to unfold, something unplanned, something real. I turned slightly in my chair, feeling the familiar prickle at the base of my neck, my heart thudding low and steady against my ribs, not with fear, but with the sharp pulse of something almost feral, anticipation. The dean's eyes scanned the sea of graduates and families, and then, as if pulled by a string, locked onto mine. "Stephanie Allen," he said, his voice ringing out clear and proud across the hall, "please come forward once again." There was a stunned silence, a beat of confusion where even the air seemed to hesitate, and then a soft murmur as heads turned toward me, cameras swinging in my direction, lenses clicking and whirring like mechanical insects drawn to the scent of something extraordinary. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate, the blood roaring so loudly in my ears I could barely hear my own footsteps as I crossed the stage a second time. The diploma case under my arm felt heavier now, not with burden, but with weight, the solid, undeniable weight of triumph. Claire, sitting stiff and frozen among the VIP section, jerked her head up sharply, her eyes narrowing into slits, her jaw tightening so hard I could see the muscles twitch from 20 feet away. I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that she was calculating now, calculating and losing because she, who had always known everything before anyone else, had no idea what was about to happen. The dean smiled at me, genuine and warm, and in his hands he held another diploma case, this one darker, more ornate, with a gold seal glinting under the auditorium lights. "It is my immense pleasure," he said, his voice rich with pride, "to announce that Stephanie Allen has also successfully completed a second degree through the university's Accelerated Honors Program." The room inhaled as one, a collective gasp sharp enough to slice the air into ribbons. "Graduating not only with a Bachelor of Business Administration," he continued, pausing to let the words sink in, "but also with a Bachelor of Science in Strategic Leadership, awarded with distinction." I heard the intake of breath from Claire's seat like a distant whisper, a small, wounded sound she could not stop herself from making, and it fed a part of me I hadn't even realized was starving. The cameras swung toward her, oh, the beautiful, cruel justice of it, capturing her pale face, the way her mouth opened slightly as if to protest, then snapped shut again when no words would come. The entire auditorium erupted into a second, louder wave of applause, this one different from the polite clapping before. This was thunderous, raucous, triumphant, the kind of applause that is given when people recognize greatness standing before them and choose, willingly, to celebrate it. I accepted the second diploma with both hands, feeling the leather warm and smooth against my skin, and turned to face the crowd, letting them see me, all of me, with nothing to hide and nothing left to prove. The dean leaned in slightly as he handed me the case, his voice pitched low enough only I could hear. "You earned every bit of this," he said simply, and in that moment, those 6 words felt heavier, truer, and more valuable than anything my family had ever said to me in my entire life. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer, and stepped back into the spotlight as the dean motioned me forward again, holding a small envelope this time, thin but heavy, like a promise made solid. Inside, I would later find, was a personal invitation to a prestigious leadership summit in Washington, D.C., an honor extended to less than 1% of the graduating students across the nation. But at that moment, I tucked it into my pocket without opening it, because the real victory was already mine. Behind the podium, behind the applause, behind the curtain of confetti and the flash of cameras, Claire sat frozen, her program crumpled in her white-knuckled hand, her face burning with the kind of rage that comes not from hatred, but from realization. The cold, brutal realization that she had underestimated me. She hadn't just underestimated me, she had misunderstood the battlefield itself. While she had been busy laughing, mocking, preening, and basking in the easy approval of a world that had never challenged her, I had been building an empire in the dark, stone by stone, failure by failure, pain by pain, until it stood so high, so indestructible, that even she could not tear it down. I did not just catch up to her. I had overtaken her so thoroughly, so completely, that there was no comparison left to be made, no narrative left for her to twist into a story where she still came out on top. I was no longer the struggling older sister dragging herself across the finish line by sheer stubbornness. I was something else now. Something untouchable. Something permanent. The ceremony ended in a blur of flashes and handshakes and congratulations I barely registered, my body moving through it all like a river that had finally found its path after years of carving through stone. When I finally made it outside, into the sharp, sweet air of the early evening, I stood at the edge of the courtyard and let the last rays of sun fall across my face. Families swarmed around me, but I stood still, grounded, as a storm gathered behind me. Stephanie. Claire's voice, sharp, high, desperate in a way I had never heard before, cut through the hum of celebration. I turned slowly, letting her come to me, making her cross the distance herself. She reached me breathless, her hair disheveled, her perfect lipstick smudged just slightly at the corners, the tiniest cracks in the porcelain doll mask she had worn so long. "You lied," she hissed, the words barely above a whisper, but vibrating with fury. I tilted my head, studying her the way a scientist might study a specimen trapped under glass. "I never lied," I said, my voice calm and cold and final. "I just didn't tell you everything." "You made me look stupid," she snapped, the anger rising, thickening her voice until it cracked. "You made me look." I stepped forward, closing the distance until there was no mistaking the authority between us, no pretending we were still equals in this story. "You did that all by yourself," I said, my words low and even and sharp enough to leave marks. "You thought you could define me by your limits. You thought you could shame me into staying small. You thought you were the sun and I would always orbit you." I shook my head slowly, savoring every word, every cut. "But I am not your satellite, Claire," I said. "I am my own star." And with that, I turned away, my 2 degrees tucked securely against my chest, the evening unfolding before me like an open road lined with endless possibilities. Behind me, Claire stood alone, surrounded by a world she could no longer control, staring after someone she had spent her whole life pretending not to see, and now could not look away from. The envelope was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, but as I slid back into my seat, my heart hammered against my ribs with the certainty that its contents would be anything but small. I held it for a moment longer than necessary, the smoothness of the thick paper brushing against my fingertips, the golden crest of the university catching the light with every tiny shift of my hand. I knew, deep in my bones, that this was not a generic thank you card or some canned letter of congratulations meant for every graduate who bothered to show up on time. No, this envelope was heavy with purpose. This envelope was the culmination of everything that had ever been denied to me, everything I had carved out for myself in the quiet spaces where no one was looking. Everything I had built with hands that had known only rejection and determination, and the kind of love that expects nothing in return. I opened it carefully, savoring the weight of the moment, sliding the single sheet of ivory paper free with trembling fingers that had earned the right to tremble, not from fear, not from uncertainty, but from the sheer magnitude of having finally arrived. The words swam before my eyes for a moment, and then they snapped into focus, each line sharper and more impossible than the last. Congratulations, Stephanie Allen. In recognition of your academic excellence, leadership, and extraordinary perseverance, we are honored to offer you a full scholarship for continued graduate studies at Whitmore University School of Business and Strategic Leadership. My throat tightened, a lump forming that I could not and would not swallow down. Whitmore, one of the top 5 business schools in the country, a place so elite, so untouchable, that I had not even dared to dream of applying there until sometime far into the future when maybe, just maybe, I could have afforded it on my own. And yet here it was. A door thrown open not by family connections, not by empty flattery, but by the force of my own relentless will. A full ride. Every class, every book, every sleepless night and backbreaking effort, paid for not because someone pitied me, but because someone powerful saw me. For a few long, shuddering breaths, I simply sat there, the letter trembling slightly in my hands, the applause fading into background noise, the colors and movements of the auditorium blurring at the edges of my vision. And then, almost without meaning to, I lifted my head and turned, not seeking anyone's approval, not searching for acknowledgement, but simply because some victories deserved to be witnessed by those who had most thoroughly insisted they would never happen. There she was. Claire still sat rigidly in her chair, the once pristine program crumpled like tissue paper between her clawed fingers, her mouth set into a brittle line so tight it looked painful. Her face was a palette of rage and disbelief and something else, something darker, something she had never allowed herself to feel before when she looked at me. Fear. Not fear of me hurting her, not fear of me lashing out, but the deeper, more devastating fear of irrelevance. Fear of becoming the footnote in a story she had always believed she was writing. I met her eyes across the sea of families and flashing cameras and smiling graduates, and for the first time in my entire life, I smiled at her not with bitterness, not with mockery, but with pure, unadulterated serenity. It was a smile that said, I never needed you. It was a smile that said, I was never chasing you. It was a smile that said, I was already miles ahead of you, and you were too busy admiring yourself to even notice. Her fingers twitched, the broken program slipping slightly from her grasp, but she made no move to pick it up, no move to speak, no move to defend the crumbling facade that was already turning to dust around her. She simply stared back, helpless, silent, and small in a way I had never thought possible. As the dean returned to the podium for the final closing remarks, I folded the scholarship letter neatly and tucked it into the inner pocket of my gown, a secret crown worn close to the heart. I listened politely as he thanked the faculty, the families, the students, and then formally pronounced the graduating class of the year complete. Caps flew into the air around me like a flock of startled birds, and for a moment the world was nothing but the soft rush of bodies moving forward into the future, into possibility, into freedom. I walked slowly out into the golden light of the courtyard, my step steady, the 2 diploma cases pressing comfortingly against my ribs like old friends who had stood by me through the worst and would celebrate with me through the best. The families gathered again, buzzing with plans for photos and dinners and after parties, the air thick with laughter and the crackle of fresh beginnings. I made my way to a quiet corner of the courtyard, away from the center of the storm, and let the weight of everything settle into my bones like a long-awaited exhale. I had thought once that success would feel like shouting from rooftops, like roaring my name into a sky that had refused to listen. But standing there, surrounded by 1,000 bright futures, I realized that true success wasn't loud. It wasn't brash. It was the steady thrum of knowing who you are, the unshakable certainty that no one could ever again make you smaller than you had chosen to be. Behind me, somewhere in the swirling crowd, Claire was still sitting, still clutching the shreds of a story that no longer belonged to her, still trying to figure out when exactly the world had shifted beneath her feet. And I was already walking away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because the real victory was never in making her see me. The real victory was in knowing that even if she never did, even if no one ever did, it changed nothing. I had built my life without their permission. I had rewritten the scoreboard while they were still busy keeping track of imaginary points, and in the end, their approval was nothing but a relic of a world I had already left behind. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass, I pulled out my phone and sent a simple text to my roommate, ready to celebrate. Let's make it unforgettable. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and lifted my face to the sky, feeling the warmth of the setting sun against my skin, the promise of 1,000 roads still waiting to be walked. She had laughed when she thought I was struggling. She had laughed when she thought I would never rise above the small, neat box she had built for me. But success isn't always loud, and neither is payback. Subscribe for more stories in which outsiders don't just rise to the occasion, they rewrite the scoreboard.